Over the last little while, we set out to understand the state of boxing in South Africa. While we peel back the layers to the fight game's gritty core, we find ourselves with an even bigger question than what's gone wrong with boxing in South Africa. From policy puzzles to governance gaps, boxing in South Africa offers a ringside seat to the complexities of sports administration and the role of the Ministry of Sports, Arts and Culture. Join us and the team at 22 Hours as we lace up our gloves and dive into the heart of this matter. Between 1927 and 2003, South African fighters held 49 world titles. In 1995, the newly liberated Rainbow Nation celebrated 6 world champions, followed by 5 the next year and another 6 in 1997. Among these were champions like the Sulky Junior Lightweight Brian Mitchell, the Rose of Soweto Dingaan Thobela, the 3-division champ Baby Jake Maklala, and the bruising Corey Saunders, who shocked the world to become the world heavyweight champion. To get a glimpse into this world, we headed over to WeBox Gym in Bregauri, Johannesburg, to speak to the man nicknamed the Road Warrior, Brian Mitchell.
When I started in 1970, amateur boxing was very strong. You know, the boxing wasn't at the schools, but we had a championship called School Championships. And then we had Southern Transvaal, then we had Transvaal, which is now Gauteng. We had essays. We were busy. You know, the amateurs today hardly fight. So I had 110 amateur fights. Today, anybody fights anybody. You had to be a Transvaal champion to face the South African champion, which means when you fought the South African champion, it was the best guys in the country. So I turned pro at the age of 18 or 19, I think it was, and became a pro. But I was working. I had to hold down a job, 9 to 5, 8 to 5. So I used to run early in the morning, go and work the whole day. I was a tradesman, working on machines the whole day, and then go to the boxing gym in the evening. But in our day, no, we had to work. We had to work and fight because we weren't earning a lot of money. But I must say we were fighting more often than the guys fight today. If you're available, I was one of the young white guys that was prepared to fight in the townships. The black promoters loved me in the townships. The people did. I became the people's champion because I just wanted to fight and build my career, and I wasn't scared of going into the townships to fight. And it was lovely. It was great for my career because I was getting 4 or 5 fights a year. You only had the WBA and the WBC when I won the world title in '86. It was tougher to get to a world champion, tougher to get a world title fight. So you had to work your way through. You know, I think it was my 29th, my 30th professional fight when I fought for the WBA title in 1986. Today, guys are fighting for world titles after 10, 15 fights.
But just 7 years from the Saunders world title we mentioned earlier, in 2010, Boxing South Africa was insolvent, governance was on an ad hoc basis, and the federation owed SARS around 8 million rand.
It has been a mess. BSA has been a mess for a couple of years, and it's not fair on the boxers. At the end of the line, the boxers are being affected. It's not what it used to be. You know, world champions in my time were world champions. Today, you've got so many organizations you can fight for. But the guys are still good, you know. In South Africa, we've still got, if you got the X Factor, you get a shot like Nonchinga, like Malajeka, the great Bungus of the world. If you're good enough, you get a shot at a big title. But today, you got to be very special.
In 2019, only 480 boxers saw action, compared with 612 in 2010. Most recently, the boxing promoters hit back at the sports ministry by interdicting the minister's decision to appoint a new board, and the legal battle that ensued exposed the problematic power dynamic between Boxing South Africa, the entity meant to govern the sport, and the Promoters Association, without whose funds and fighters the sport wouldn't exist. To get an understanding of just how bad things were, we reached out to Colin Nomaganjani Nathan, the legendary trainer and director of No Doubt Management.
So first and foremost, you get fighters, crossing them from the amateur system to the professionals. They need a promoter to promote. The promoter goes to Boxing South Africa with the fighters, procures a date, puts the funding into a trust account, fight cards happen, BSA pay the fighters. ICU is the best way to describe it. The board, they made decisions that Mickey Mouse would scratch his head. You know, they were asking stakeholders to go on refresher courses, and if you never did it, you wouldn't have had your license. There were crazy suspensions last year where people were outspoken on social media and they got suspended. BSA at the time were acting high and mighty, but they weren't taking care of the problem, the core problem. And the core problem was fighters were being left high and dry and they weren't fighting. And tournaments were getting cancelled last minute. Fighters were going to weigh-ins, weighing in. They hadn't eaten for 2-3 days and they were just left high and dry. The promoter never put the money in the account. They didn't follow the BSA rules and regulations. BSA were allowing them to get away with literally avoiding these rules and regulations. Why does a fighter have to go to a weigh-in and get told that his fight's off or her fight's off because of administrative issues? We all know what it is. The promoter doesn't come up with money. A fighter trains, he signs for 100 Rand, for example, which obviously they fight for a lot more. But in a fighter's mind, they've already spent that 100 Rand. And they go to the weigh-in and they get told the fight's off. And there were expectations on that 100 Rand to feed their family. Do you know how soul-destroying that is?
This lack of activity has translated to poor performances internationally. And in 2023, more than 85% of South African fighters who competed abroad were defeated, the worst losing ratio in more than 50 years. These challenges that Boxing SA has faced have prompted the Ministry of Sports, Arts and Culture to intervene and to remove the board.
The Minister of Sport now seems to be on track. He's online with it. He's setting up a new boxing South Africa.
After a second attempt to introduce a new board, it seems South African boxing is once again stable.
So where we stand now, obviously the Ministry of Sport, Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, and then the Minister Zizi Kodwa basically have the powers to appoint the board. So in place of the board, Mandla Nhlanganiso, in essence, has the right to sanction tournaments, to keep the sport on the go. We couldn't have a situation where boxing was not happening in the country, and to have boxing being fought in everywhere but the ring, I think would have been problematic, especially for the fighters. For the fighters, we must remember this is their livelihood.
But why did it have to get to this? And if the ministry's interventions can so easily be derailed, it begs the question, what exactly does the sports ministry do? If you ask the average South African this question, you'd be hard-pressed to get a clear answer. According to the ministry themselves, their objective is remaking South Africa into a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic and prosperous society. That sounds a bit fluffy.
Forget about the politics of who's running what. At the end of the day, we want it to continue, and the fighters want to fight.
Starting with government and the corporates, of course. I mean, help us open boxing gyms. There must be many great champions out there. We've got 60 million people.
There are rules and regulations governed by the Act, which the promoter and the fighter and all the people around the fighter, the trainer, the manager, the seconds, and the matchmaker all have to abide to.
In sport, the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture sits at the top of a pyramid that includes SASCOC, the Olympic Committee, the national, provincial and district sports federations. To achieve these targets, the ministry formulates guiding policies that inform how federations and bodies are governed. For boxing, the Act is the South African Boxing Act of 2001.
Boxing is one of the few sports, if not the only sport, that is actually governed by an act of parliament. Boxing South Africa is there to regulate the relationship between boxers, promoters, managers, and create a viable and functional and efficient environment for that to happen. In that dynamic, I think you're always going to find friction. I think the way boxing is funded, in essence, there are challenges. Being a promoter is not easy. I think you have over 70 registered promoters in the country, but I think less than 20 of them were active for the year 2023. You have over 700 boxers who are registered, but less than 270 of them saw action in the ring. So there is this deficit where we're simply not producing enough shows.
Apart from formulating policy, the ministry also allocates significant funds to sports, arts and culture activities. In the 2023-2024 financial year, the department's total budget allocation was 6.34 billion rand, with sports federations allocated 117 million rand. And of that, Boxing South Africa was allocated 19.9 million rand.
We are governed by a government entity in Boxing South Africa, which I think is great. I mean, there were calls last year for boxing to be privatized, and I was one of the guys who put my hand up and said no. We just need the right leadership to get the sport going.
Boxing's on the go. There was a tournament in the past weekend. There's been tournaments. I know there's activity ago in the sports. A great stroke from the department just to keep boxing on its feet and keep the sport moving forward.
So I'm looking forward to the new Boxing South Africa. I think Mandla Nhlanganiso will become the CEO. I hope so. He seems like a good guy. and just get boxing back on track. I don't believe that promoters associations should be stopping BSA from operating. And the Minister of Sport, he's got a big portfolio and a big job, but he loves boxing obviously as well. And let him sort it out, let him get the right commission in place, the right people in place, because I mean everybody loves boxing.
So, to wrap it all up, what does the ministry actually do? According to the public, they're the Ministry of Congratulations and Condolences. But the ministry actually does formulate policy and tries to promote nation building. However, sports federations rarely stick to these policies because they're guided by their own constitutions, which leads the ministry being relegated to hosting award ceremonies and erecting flags. Where they do make a big difference, however, is in the funding of sports federations, especially the smallest federations, such as boxing, who aren't able to generate their own revenue. But perhaps the biggest problem in recent times with the sports ministry has been the people in charge of the ministry. Fikile Mbalula, for example, loved an international trip and a photo opportunity, and under Natim Tetwa, massive amounts of money went missing and were unaccounted for. And now, Zizi Godwa has been forced to resign after being arrested and charged with corruption. So, with an ineffective sports ministry, it shouldn't be a surprise that boxing and other federations tend to be dysfunctional, and this needs to stop.